The concept of a tank was first proposed by Lieutenant Colonel Ernest Winston in near total secrecy, and eventually gained the enthusiastic support of Winston Churchill. As a result, the government formed the Landships Committee, comprised of military engineers as well as officers from the Army and the Royal Navy Air Service in order to construct heavily armored vehicles. The first tank was invented by a man by the name of Sir William Triton, as well as Walter Gordon Wilson, a British scientist, and was created by using conveyor belt-like tracks over the wheels as well as heavy armor placed onto the machine, which is what separated the tank from other vehicles, such as cars. The tank was created in order to counter trench warfare, as Britain wanted to develop a vehicle that could break through enemy lines, specifically against barbed wire and other defenses that made it difficult for troops to engage against the enemy. In World War I, tanks were supposed to carry troops past the enemy's defenses and into the trenches where they could engage with the enemy. In battles, due to the primitive armor of tanks were still damaged by machine gun fire as well as heavy artillery shells. In addition to the previous fact, a lack of speed and technological malfunctions of the earliest tanks caused most of them to break down before they could get to the enemy trenches during a battle. The inside of every tank was extremely hot, as during World War I, they were extremely prone to overheating, causing extremely uncomfortable conditions for the crew inside. The tank did not have much of an impact in World War I, as it was still quite primitive due to the limited capabilities and lack of doctrine, and would later be improved and have a much greater impact in World War II, as its heavy armor, improved speed, as well as heavy weaponry were able to annihilate enemy troops. Still in battles such as the Battle of the Somme, when 49 British tanks, the Mark I, were deployed onto the battlefield and led to immediate victory for the Allied powers. Despite the inexperienced crew, as well as the fact that only 31 tanks crossed the German lines, the tanks were seen as an immediate success by their ability to overwhelm the soldiers in the trenches, which prompted the British to construct 1,000 more for the following battle. Tanks are still used today and have a large impact, as they are able to be used by many different militaries, well in flat areas, and are a large part of most militaries, such as the US, Saudi Arabia, as well as China. Tanks, on the downside, are extremely dangerous, as they come into play when ethical issues come up. The power of tanks and their weaponry contribute to the fact that 90% of victims of explosive weapons in urban areas are civilians. Therefore, regulations of tanks in urban areas or other heavily populated areas should be restricted, as they are a major safety hazard.
Good morning, friends. Today we are with a co-inventor of the tank, Brendan Bikeman.
Oh, wow.
And
Moving up in the world.
yeah, we're here to find out something about this fascinating technology.
For sure.
Okay, so our first question for you. Okay, our first question for you is, what did the Central Powers do in order to counter the invention of the tank?
To counter it, well, first is you develop tanks on your side. That's one thing. You develop tanks that counter it. The idea of using a tank to counter a tank was kind of a revolutionary concept. Initially, they used artillery and essentially what turned into anti-tank guns to do it. And then they thought, let's put these guns on something that's mobile, and now all of a sudden you have a tank or a tank destroyer. That was one of the main ways you can do it. Some structural fortifications. These were tanks that would break down often. So if you had things like not necessarily trenches, but you could use different cement blocks and things like that they couldn't penetrate. That'd be another way to do it. And then anti-tank weaponry for infantry. That was more probably a World War II development than a World War I development, but it kind of grew from that.
That's very fascinating. Our next question is, how would a civilian feel about the invention of the tank?
It depends which side you're on. If you're on the side that invented it, you're probably feeling pretty good because you're probably going to win the war. If you're on the side that didn't invent it, though, I'm sure they were terrifying. And today, even modern tanks are super terrifying for civilians, I would think. If you see a tank in a city, it's like a huge, huge deal. Probably not particularly thrilled in general. But if you're on, like I said, if you're on the winning side or if they're yours, it's probably great.
That's also very intriguing. Our last question is, how was the tank used in World War I, and what strategies?
Big things were to break trench warfare. These were very slow-moving tanks. They were working at 4 to 5 miles per hour, really. So they weren't like blitzkrieg like they were in World War II, where they were going 30, 40 miles an hour. But They were still an armored vehicle that could carry anywhere from 8 to 10 people, right? They had weapons on them, and you could use them to essentially drive over a trench and protect those people and the people behind it from fire coming from that trench. So the big way they were used were really to break that stalemate. Again, they weren't super reliable at that point, but they were still somewhat effective. And then, as you saw in like World War II, you developed the ability to blitzkrieg that we still use today, the lightning warfare, very quick movements. They're strategic around different targets. I would say in World War I, they're primarily to break sieges. This was their point. They tried that. They tried things like mustard gas, things like that, whatever to break that stalemate. So, yeah, sure.
All right, thank you for joining us today.
No problem. Glad to help.